to take the most peaceful 2 countries in each of those 9 regions, because it's a lot harder to be peaceful in some parts of the world than it is in others. So the achievement of those countries that become relatively peaceful in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, and in South Asia, that's pretty darn significant. So let's study them and see what we can learn from them. So what we want to do is bring together representatives, high-level representatives from the most peaceful countries in each of these regions of the world, honor them, number one, but also study them. How did this happen? How did they become so peaceful? So you look at that list, you'll see a number of countries that you say, wow, a couple of decades ago, they wouldn't have been in the top 40, they would have been in the bottom 10. And now they're peaceful. How did that happen? What can we learn from them? And we want to encourage these countries to take on a global leadership role, at least a regional leadership role, to help their friends and neighbors to become more peaceful. So that's part of what we're doing with the Global Peace Index. One other thing that came out of the index, it's a phenomenal analysis. Just do a Google search for Global Peace Index. You'll go into it and you will find a data resource that is absolutely mind-boggling. But one of the things that we did with this was to find corollaries. What correlates with peace? Not only what are the drivers of peace, but what are the corollaries? One of the main ones is a correlation between business, peace, and economics. Peace is good for business. And we have a phenomenal myth afloat in this country that war is good for the economy. It grows out of what happened when we had a depression, then we had World War II, and then we had prosperity. So you'd say, therefore, war is good for the economy. Well, rather false logic behind that. The fact of the matter is that war is not good for the economy. It may be good for a couple of industries that are a tiny fraction of the overall economy. The fact of the matter is, and the studies very clearly indicated, there have been 3 major international conferences on this issue this year with major economists, every one of them reaching the very same conclusion that war of any kind, any place, is bad for the economy. In fact, a study that reported by Paul Collier indicates that the average negative economic impact of an average war is a negative impact of $60 billion. That's the average negative impact on the economy of the average war, negative $60 billion. Now, there are about 25 wars going on right now around the world. If we could eliminate those and eliminate the $60 billion that is harming the economies of those countries, we might be able to turn around our own economy. Not a bad idea. So one of the high correlations is that business, the economy, and peace go together. Another is that education is good for peace. Very high correlation between education levels and the peacefulness of countries. Good governance, of course, is a key factor. Low corruption, a key factor in the peacefulness of countries. And regional cooperations, those nations that have developed agreements with their neighbors to work out differences without resorting to violence, also tend to be among the most peaceful countries in the world. So that's kind of the good news. We figured these things out, we're learning these things, and we're making progress. That doesn't mean that the job is done. I indicated that we still have 25 wars going on around the world, and that, of course, is far, far, far too many. And we face some enormous threats. While that trend line that I show you is going down in terms of the frequency and severity of violent conflict, there's a high risk of it reversing and going in the wrong direction. Among the challenges, population growth and population migration, the convergence of cultures coming together, being forced by social, population, and economic pressures to live side by side when they're not so sure they want to live side by side and do business with one another. And we're seeing that produce some very serious clashes. Climate change and what that will do to scarcity of resources and competition for resources poses an enormous threat to the future of our civilization and our ability to work together and solve these problems peacefully rather than resorting to violence. And keep in mind that the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction is real. And it basically means that almost anyone, almost anywhere, can get their hands on weapons that can do unspeakable damage any place, anytime. And if we don't find ways to tamp down the hostility among different populations, we could find ourselves here in Denver, or where I live in Washington, very vulnerable, of course, or anywhere, being the victims of weapons of mass destruction. It's time to put into practice what we're learning about building a more peaceful world, to keep that trend line going in the direction that it is going, and to provide for our own safety and security. Because the fact of the matter is, and I am not anti-military, I get to lecture at West Point every year. Believe it or not, this Peace Corps guy, the Alliance for Peacebuilding, gets invited to lecture at West Point. I get invited to spend a week at the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and we get along wonderfully, wonderfully. Because the guys in uniform look at me and they say to me, I want you to succeed. Because if you succeed, I don't have to have somebody shooting at me, and I don't have to shoot at anybody, and that's what I want. We get along just fine. But they recognize, and we recognize, that we've got to get on with building a more peaceful world, or that positive trend could go in the wrong direction. So how do we do it? How do we build a more peaceful world? Well, it takes a multi-track approach, and this is one of the wonderful things that we've learned. Both official diplomacy and unofficial diplomacy. And the exciting thing is that I will talk about mostly is the unofficial diplomacy, because that's what I do. I am not a Foreign Service officer. I am not an official diplomat. And yet I have been fortunate enough to be a part of a team of absolute civilians who have been given credit by the heads of state in a couple of countries with bringing an end to their very large-scale wars. Citizens playing a major role in bringing an end to violent conflict. And there's a war that everybody thought was going to happen in West Africa that my friend and colleague Milt Lauenstein made an investment. Private citizens just made an investment, said it looks like Guinea-Bissau is on the verge of civil war, let's do something. He funded a small project there, and the war never happened. Now, we can't prove that it didn't happen because of Milt and the project that we carried out, but it didn't happen. And everybody said it's going to happen. It's going to happen within 6 months. Didn't happen because of an investment by private citizens making this happen. So what's happening now, this never was the case before. We now have unofficial diplomacy, private citizens playing a unique role in partnership with the official diplomats. And I won't go into detail, but when I well, I'm doing it now, but when I was particularly involved in the Ethiopian-Eritrea border war, we had a very interesting relationship with the State Department, where we didn't always agree, but we respected one another. And it was the fact that the official diplomats were able to carry one message and we were able to do something else to supplement it that made the peace process successful. So multi-track approach, multifaceted. We need to work both with the leaders who are providing for a conflict environment, but also at the grassroots, where you have broad-based citizens who have deep-seated animosity toward one another. And you've got to work at the grassroots level as well and tamp that down. So what we do is take a multifaceted approach to it. We need to deal with the proximate causes, the things that are the immediate causes for people to be shooting at each other, but also at the root causes, what's underlying it. And let's deal with the root causes as well as the proximate causes. We need to be collaborative and we need to be systemic. We all need to work together to make this happen. And there certainly is a role for peacekeepers. Those are people, the United Nations peacekeepers in their blue helmets have done a remarkable job. People dump all over the UN, and understandably so. It's a very inefficient organization. Any of you who do international business know that international business can be inefficient. You've got travel costs, you've got language and cultural costs, exchange rates and so on. It's inefficient to try to do things across cultures and across borders, but it is absolutely essential. And the peacekeeping troops, the UN has 19 peacekeeping missions underway right now, and you hear absolutely nothing about them. You know why? Because they work. Because they're successful. These are places where we could very well have large-scale violence going on right now if it weren't for the